On the morning of July 12, 2020, chaos erupted inside the Maryland Correctional Institution in Baltimore. At approximately 6 a.m., a routine check by a corrections officer turned grisly when the body of inmate Jelani Hightower was discovered. The 32-year-old, serving a 5-year sentence for drug possession, was found lifeless on his bunk in cell block D. His throat slashed and his torso brutally stabbed 14 times. The cell was a scene of horror. Blood stained the concrete floor, shredded bedding lay scattered, a stool was overturned, and bloody handprints smeared the walls, evidence of a violent and desperate struggle. The officer immediately locked down the scene and alerted the prison security team. Within minutes, the entire facility was placed under emergency lockdown. Detective Keshan Jakes of the Baltimore Police Department's Major Crimes Unit arrived shortly after to lead the investigation. He coordinated closely with prison officials to secure the area and begin the collection of critical evidence. Warden Marcus Phillips granted the investigative team unrestricted access to all records and internal protocols. Preliminary findings from a medical examiner suggested Jelani had been dead for at least 2 to 4 hours, with signs of early rigor mortis setting in. His estimated time of death was placed between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Forensic teams recovered blood samples, latent fingerprints, and a crude but deadly weapon, a sharpened toothbrush shank fashioned from inmate-accessible commissary items. Detective Jakes began his inquiries with a night guard on duty, Darnell Tinsley, who had patrolled cell block D during the overnight hours. Tinsley mentioned hearing muffled noises around 2 a.m., which he assumed were typical nighttime disturbances. In his report, he wrote, "I did my rounds at 2:15. Everything seemed normal. D block was quiet except for the usual sounds." He also noted that Jelani's cellmate, Terrell Lyman, seemed unusually anxious during the morning head count. Lyman, 29, was serving an 8-year sentence for armed robbery. He was promptly isolated and interrogated. When questioned, he insisted he had slept through the entire incident. "I take prescription sleep meds for my insomnia," Lyman told investigators. "I didn't hear a thing. I swear I didn't do this." Prison medical records confirmed that Lyman had been prescribed a sleep aid, although the dosage was relatively mild. Investigators found no signs of forced entry into the cell. Surveillance footage from the hallway showed no movement in or out of the cell between 10 p.m., when the doors were secured, and the time of the murder, suggesting the attacker was either Lyman or someone who had access before lockdown. News of Jelani's death was delivered to his mother, Tamaria Fulton, by prison authorities. Distraught and in disbelief, she told Detective Jakes during an emotional interview at her East Baltimore home, he was just trying to serve his time quietly. "I didn't know of anyone who had it out for him." Jelani was keeping his head down. As the investigation continued, the facility remained on lockdown, and one haunting question lingered. Was this the work of a silent killer, or something even more sinister within the prison walls? He had plans for a better future. Jelani Hightower was working toward his GED and regularly attending counseling sessions. Nothing about his death made sense. As Detective Keshan Jakes and his team dug deeper, they began reviewing Jelani's recent communications and interactions within the prison walls. They found that, in the week leading up to the murder, Jelani had made only 3 phone calls, all to his mother. Given the secure environment of the Maryland Correctional Institution, suspicion quickly turned inward. Investigators focused on the likelihood that the killer was an inmate. One of the first leads explored was prison gang activity. Warden Marcus Phillips provided Jelani's full disciplinary record, which included a minor altercation that had occurred 3 weeks earlier in the yard. The confrontation involved a known member of the East Side Kings, a gang with heavy influence over cell block D. Though the incident was quickly defused by guards and resulted in no formal punishment, it stood out as a possible motive. Understanding the relationship between Jelani and his cellmate, Terrell Lyman, became critical. Jelani, a 31-year-old former accountant, had been serving a 6-year sentence for embezzlement since March 2017. He kept a low profile, steering clear of gangs and spending most of his time in the library or in educational programs. Fellow inmates had even nicknamed him Professor. Terrell Lyman was a stark contrast. At 35, the former construction worker was serving a 12-year term for armed robbery, beginning in November 2015. Known for his aggressive demeanor, Terrell had a reputation for controlling part of a contraband ring operating from the west wing of the prison. After Jelani's body was discovered on July 12, 2020, the investigation intensified. Forensic evidence confirmed that Jelani had died from massive blood loss caused by a severed carotid artery. The medical examiner recorded 14 stab wounds, with 9 concentrated around the neck and chest. The murder weapon, a sharpened toothbrush handle, had been used with brutal force. The number and placement of the wounds suggest overwhelming rage, noted Dr. Eliza Matsuo in her autopsy report dated July 14, 2020. This wasn't just an act of killing. It was an expression of fury. On July 13th, Detective Jakes interviewed Kaya Haskins, a 42-year-old inmate known to cooperate with authorities in exchange for small favors. According to the transcript, Haskins hinted an undisclosed tension between Jelani and Terrell. Those two had something going on no one was supposed to know about, Haskins claimed. Could have been romantic. Could have been business. But Terrell, he doesn't take disrespect lightly. And something between them shifted recently. When questioned the following day, Terrell stuck to his story. He'd been asleep the entire time and awoke to find Jelani already dead. But his version didn't add up. There were no signs of struggle on his body, no defensive wounds, no scratches or bruises, despite the violent nature of the attack. Even more puzzling, correctional officers noted that Terrell appeared eerily calm after the discovery. Instead of reacting with shock or panic, he seemed strangely resigned, as if he had expected what was coming. The question remained, was this a spontaneous outburst, a planned act, or something buried deeper in the walls of Cell Block D? Prison administrative logs revealed a curious development. On June 23, 2020, Jelani High Tow Tower submitted a formal request to be reassigned to a different cell. The reason he gave was vague, personal issues, with no further details. The request was denied due to limited capacity. Still, the timing caught the attention of Detective Keshin Jakes, who began to investigate what may have driven Jelani to seek a change just weeks before his murder. During an interview on July 15th, veteran day shift guard Latrice Germain, who had worked in that wing for 7 years, added more context. Terrell was more agitated than usual, pacing a lot, talking less. Jelani pulled back too. He stopped going to the library as often. I never saw anything overt, no direct threats, but something was definitely off between them. That unease turned physical when investigators found a blood-stained cloth hidden beneath Terrell Lyman's mattress during the initial cell sweep. When questioned, Terrell casually dismissed it, claiming it was from a minor cut he suffered in the prison workshop. But lab tests told a different story. The blood matched Jelani's type, directly contradicting Terrell's explanation. As leads continued to unfold, Detective Jakes identified another possible suspect, Jermaine Fulton, an inmate housed in a neighboring cell block. According to prison records, Fulton had an unresolved conflict with Jelani over an unpaid gambling debt, $340 worth of commissary items. This expanded the scope of the investigation, suggesting the motive might not be solely tied to cellmate tension, but also to larger prison dynamics. Then, on July 20th, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Evidence surfaced of a secret romantic relationship between Jelani and Terrell, reframing the entire narrative. What began as a straightforward homicide probe evolved into a tangled web of intimacy, secrecy, and emotional control, one that may have ultimately led to murder. Detective Jakes, a seasoned veteran with 15 years in correctional investigations, made a breakthrough while reviewing contraband activity logs from the past 6 months. He uncovered a series of coded notes passed between Jelani and Terrell, concealed inside library books transferred between their cell blocks at Eastern State Correctional Facility in Pennsylvania. The notes told a story, Jakes reported. They began sweet, full of emotion and excitement, but quickly spiraled into something darker. Early messages referenced secret meetups in the prison laundry room. But as time passed, the language shifted. Terrell's notes grew increasingly possessive, while Jelani's reflected growing fear and desperation. One chilling note from Terrell read, "You belong to me now. Don't forget who keeps you safe in here." Another, dated May 2020, was written by Jelani. "If anyone finds out about us, I'm dead. My cousins on the outside would never accept this." Detectives re-interviewed Darnell Tinsley, Jelani's former cellmate. At first, he stuck to his original statement. But after 4 hours of questioning, he finally relented. "I didn't want to be involved," Tinsley admitted. "But yeah, I saw it. Terrell used to swing by our cell, always pretending it was nothing. But there was tension, real tension. I even heard them once in the shower room." Terrell said, "You think you could just walk away from me?" That wasn't about gambling. That was personal. The deeper Detective Jakes dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just another prison killing. It was the tragic fallout of a hidden bond turned toxic inside a world where secrets can get you killed. Tinsley eventually admitted he suspected a romantic relationship between Jelani Hightower and Terrell Lyman, but kept silent out of fear. "In here, knowing too much can get you killed," he told investigators. His reluctance was understandable. Lyman was known to have dangerous connections, and speaking out could be fatal. Forensic evidence strongly supported the theory of a personal connection. The cloth used to strangle Jelani contained multiple DNA traces, with Lyman's DNA being the most prominent. Additionally, investigators discovered trace amounts of Jelani's blood on the heel of Lyman's prison-issued shoes, directly contradicting his claim of being asleep during the murder. During his second interrogation on July 22, 2020, confronted with this mounting evidence, Lyman shifted his story. "Me and Jelani had a close bond. I won't deny that," he admitted. "In a place like this, you find connections where you can. But there wasn't anything romantic going on." He then tried to divert suspicion, suggesting that Jermaine Fulton, an inmate linked to a rival gang, may have planted the evidence to frame him over a dispute involving contraband operations. Detective Keshen Jakes questioned Fulton the next day. Although Fulton denied having any role in Jelani's death, he offered revealing context about the relationship. "Everyone knew what was going on between them," he said. "Terrell started out protecting Jelani from guys who had issues with his cousin on the outside. But that turned into something else. Terrell used it against him. He threatened to out him unless Jelani helped with smuggling and handling outside payments. Classic prison extortion with a twist. Prison documentation backed Fulton's account. An incident report from June 12, 2020, noted that Lyman assaulted another inmate who had made disparaging comments about Jelani. Then, just 2 weeks before the murder, Jelani filed a formal request to transfer to a different block, an effort to distance himself from Lyman. Correctional Officer Latrice Germain added another layer during her July 23rd interview. She recalled overhearing a disturbing exchange between the two men. Lyman was furious when he found out about the transfer request, she said. "I heard him say, 'You think paperwork's going to keep you from me? There's nowhere in this place you can hide.' I reported it up the chain, but nothing happened. We're understaffed and overpopulated. We can't watch everything." By August 1st, 2020, the investigation had zeroed in on Terrell Lyman. Detective Jakes methodically pieced together witness testimonies and forensic data. The crime lab found traces of Jelani's blood on Lyman's mattress, despite attempts to clean the area. More damning, a partial thumbprint matching Lyman's was discovered on Jelani's cell door latch, placing him at the scene between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. on July 12th. A follow-up interview with Kaya Haskins, another inmate in Block D, proved pivotal. Haskins revealed that 3 days before the murder, he overheard a heated exchange. Terrell's words were chilling. "You're mine, or you're dead." Haskins admitted he withheld this earlier, fearing retribution. Lyman's ties to the prison's contraband network made him a dangerous man to cross, something everyone inside Bay Creek Correctional Facility understood all too well. During his third interrogation, faced with mounting evidence, Terrell Lyman once again changed his story. This time, He claimed that fellow inmate Jermaine Fulton had murdered Jelani High Toe Tower over an unpaid gambling debt. However, the accusation quickly fell apart. Prison records confirmed that Fulton had been in solitary confinement at the time of the killing, making his involvement impossible. Officer Marcus Daniels provided an official statement verifying Fulton's confinement status, effectively dismantling Terrell's latest attempt to deflect suspicion. As the investigation deepened, Detective Keshen Jakes turned his attention to Jacob Williams, a known contraband dealer inside Bay Creek Correctional Facility. Though hesitant at first, Williams eventually admitted that he had supplied Terrell with a modified toothbrush, turned into a deadly shank, about 2 weeks before Jelani's murder. Williams explained that he feared denying Terrell's request would jeopardize his own smuggling operation within the prison. Although surveillance coverage was limited, available footage presented even more contradictions to Terrell's version of events. Security cameras captured him pacing near his bunk at approximately 1:30 a.m., undermining his claim that he had been asleep the entire night. Further supporting this, guard Latrice Wilson recalled hearing a hushed argument around 2 a.m. Though she initially dismissed it as routine tension, she reported it after being directly questioned. Detective Jakes also examined Terrell's institutional behavior. His record showed a troubling pattern. 3 previous assault allegations, all connected to reinforcing his dominance within the prison's hierarchy. 2 of these incidents involved physical confrontations with inmates believed to be challenging his influence. On August 5th, Darnell Tinsley, housed in the neighboring cell block, came forward with critical testimony. Tinsley stated that in the weeks leading up to the murder, Terrell had frequently boasted, "I own Jelani." This chilling remark supported earlier theories that Terrell had been blackmailing Jelani, using threats to reveal their relationship as a tool for control. Given the stigma around same-sex relationships in prison, the threat of exposure was potentially deadly. The cumulative evidence painted a dark and coercive narrative. Terrell had isolated Jelani from others, exerted psychological control, and escalated his threats into deadly violence when that control began to waver. Witnesses repeatedly referenced how Terrell spoke of Jelani in terms of ownership, suggesting he viewed him less as a person and more as property. On August 10th, 2020, Detective Jakes formally arrested Terrell Lyman, charging him with the first-degree murder of Jelani High Toe Tower. The case against him was built on a solid foundation of forensic findings, corroborated witness statements, and Terrell's own shifting stories. After Lyman's arrest, the investigation continued with focused precision. Detective Jakes, now leading the evidence consolidation phase, assembled every piece of the puzzle, from DNA results to prison incident reports, into a comprehensive case file for prosecutors. Forensic analysis confirmed that the makeshift toothbrush shank was indeed the murder weapon. Lab testing revealed both Jelani's blood and Terrell's DNA on the handle. The final medical examiner's report described 14 stab wounds, primarily concentrated in the chest and neck. Prosecutors would later argue that this wasn't an act of desperation, but a personal, rage-driven execution. Forensic technicians determined the time of death occurred between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., a vulnerable window when no security rounds were conducted on the east wing of Block C. This critical timing aligned with other emerging pieces of evidence in the murder of Jelani High Toe Tower. On August 15th, 2020, Detective Keshen Jakes secured a formal recorded statement from inmate Kaya Haskins, who had shared the cell block with both Jelani and Terrell Lyman. Haskins described a chilling pattern of threats and psychological manipulation that had unfolded over the previous 3 months. What initially seemed to others like a consensual relationship, Haskins revealed, was in fact a calculated blackmail scheme. Terrell promised Jelani protection from rival gang members, Haskins explained. But in reality, he was using him, threatening violence if Jelani ever tried to end things. A follow-up search of Terrell's personal belongings uncovered a key piece of physical evidence. Hidden inside his pillowcase was a handwritten note, written in a basic substitution cipher. Investigators swiftly decoded it. Dated July 10th, 2020, exactly 1 month before the murder. The message appeared to be a desperate plea from Jelani. "I can't do this anymore. Someone's going to find out. My family would never understand. Please let this end." The note revealed a man more afraid of exposure than physical harm. Detective Jakes also re-interviewed Jermaine Fulton, the inmate who had originally tipped off authorities about the weapon transfer. During this second interview, Fulton disclosed that Terrell had ties to the East Side Crips and claimed he'd received outside orders to silence Jelani. While Fulton denied direct involvement in the murder itself, he admitted to helping facilitate the weapon transfer under pressure. The investigation gained further traction when Darnell Tinsley, a former cellmate of Terrell's, agreed to testify in exchange for parole consideration. Tinsley recalled multiple conversations where Terrell boasted about mentally breaking Jelani down. "He talked about him like he was property," Tinsley said. "He got satisfaction from watching Jelani squirm, knowing he couldn't say anything without risking his reputation." Tinsley's delay in coming forward was attributed to fear of gang retaliation, a common barrier to cooperation in the prison environment. Throughout the investigation, Terrell remained housed in administrative segregation. He continued to assert his innocence, claiming the confrontation stemmed from gang-related tensions and that he acted in self-defense. But his account didn't hold. There were no defensive wounds on his body and no evidence tied Jelani to any rival gang activities. By October 2020, Detective Jakes had assembled enough evidence to coordinate closely with Assistant District Attorney Latrice Germain. Their legal strategy presented the murder as an act of coercion fueled by jealousy and dominance, not a random outburst of prison violence. This is a story of manipulation and fear that ended in murder when the victim tried to reclaim his independence. ADA, Germain argued during the preliminary hearing. In pretrial hearings held in November 2020, attorneys debated the admissibility of the ciphered note and the Shanks origins. Judge Reginald Patterson ultimately ruled in favor of the prosecution, citing the weight of forensic and testimonial evidence connecting Terrell directly to the crime. On January 15, 2022, 18 months after the brutal stabbing inside the Maryland Correctional Institution, the murder trial of Terrell Lyman officially began at the Baltimore City Circuit Court. Lead prosecutor Latrice Germain presented the state's case with precision, laying out what investigators believed to be a compelling motive. This murder arose from a toxic mix of jealousy and blackmail, Germain told the jury during her opening statement. From the outset, the prosecution's physical evidence was overwhelming. The homemade shank found at the crime scene contained Terrell Lyman's DNA on the handle, while forensic testing confirmed that Jelani Hightower's blood stained Terrell's prison-issued uniform. More damning still were handwritten notes recovered from Jelani's cell, which outlined the coercive nature of their sexual relationship. Multiple witnesses bolstered the state's case. Kaya Haskins, who shared a cell block with both men, testified that just 2 days before the murder, he overheard Terrell threaten Jelani. He said if Jelani didn't stay quiet about their arrangement, he'd make sure Jelani never talked to anyone again, Haskins told the court. Another inmate, Darnell Tinsley, described how Terrell had dominated Jelani through a mix of threats and manipulative offers of protection. Meanwhile, Jelani Fulton, unrelated to the victim, provided critical insight into the prison's illicit trade. Terrell ran the shank trade on the block, Fulton testified. If you wanted protection, you had to go through him. This testimony helped establish how Terrell used his gang affiliations to control and isolate inmates like Jelani. Defense attorney Zuri Haskins argued that the killing was an act of self-defense. "My client was defending himself from a sudden attack by a man who feared retribution after breaking gang rules," Haskins claimed. The defense argued that Jelani initiated the altercation after trying to cut ties with Terrell. But this narrative began to crumble under expert analysis. Forensic pathologist Dr. Marcus Washington testified that the angle and location of Jelani's wounds indicated he was attacked from behind. More importantly, there were no defensive wounds on Terrell, suggesting he had not been physically threatened at all. The prosecution also introduced a note Jelani had written to his mother the day before his death, pleading for help and expressing fear for his safety. When Terrell took the stand on February 7th, 2022, he admitted to having a sexual relationship with Jelani, but insisted it had been mutual. He claimed Jelani attacked him during a heated argument, forcing him to retaliate. However, under cross-examination, prosecutor Germain dismantled his claims. She pointed out contradictions in his story and highlighted his known ties to the Dead Money Crew prison gang. Surveillance footage then sealed the narrative, showing Terrell following Jelani into the laundry area just moments before the murder. The most emotionally charged testimony came from Tamaria Fulton, Jelani's mother. Through tears, she read her son's letters describing the fear he lived in daily and the abuse he faced. Her words deeply moved the jury, especially her portrayal of how her once hopeful son had been reduced to a terrified inmate. After 7 days of deliberation, on February 15, 2022, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Raymond Thornton sentenced Terrell Lyman to life in prison without the possibility of parole, citing the crime's premeditated nature and Lyman's complete lack of remorse. Lyman, still claiming innocence, was transferred to Jessup Correctional Institution to begin serving his sentence.